Hi, everyone. Today is the 17th of March, 2025, and welcome to the O1 Labs Crypto Reading Group. Same thing I said last time. For general navigation around the reading group, there is a Notion page that is shared on all the YouTube videos, and I will post in the chat just now. The Notion page describes the previous sessions, links to YouTube. A reading group mail list is the main way for you to get notifications if you want to attend this regularly. If you add yourself to the mail list, you'll get notifications for the next calendar events, and you can save it into your calendar and see it there. The format is 1 hour, and questions during the talk are welcome and encouraged. And obviously, if the speaker is speaking, then raise your hand. But it's preferable to keep this interactive and not be silent till the very, very end. But let's try to also keep to 1 hour. And you're welcome to use the chat, but if you can speak up, that's even better. Okay. So regarding today's speaker, I'm very happy to introduce Mahdi Sedaghat. So Mahdi is a postdoc researcher at COSIC Leuven, and a co-founder of Soundness Labs. He is working on privacy-preserving systems, zero-knowledge proofs, and scalable cryptographic protocols, aiming to bridge the gap for mass adoption of zkApps. Mahdi today will be presenting a novel authentication protocol that uses zero-knowledge proofs to improve user experience while interacting with Web3 applications and being privacy-preserving. So yeah, thanks, Mahdi, for joining. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Michelle, for the introduction, and also thank you so much for having me. As Michelle mentioned, today I want to talk about zkLogin that I contributed to this work during my internship at Soundness Labs in summer 23. And this also comes with a real deployment on Sui blockchain that I want to explain in the coming slides, and also an academic work that got accepted to CCS last year, and also is going to be presented at Real World Crypto next week as well. If you are coming to Sofia, make sure that you are going to attend this talk as well. Great. So before going through the details of zkLogin, a quick intro about Sui ecosystem, and which is relevant to the talk. Sui and Soundness Labs, the company behind multiple projects in their ecosystem. That Sui is one of them, is an L1, which is object-centric. There are two types of objects, owned and shared. And whenever we have an owned object, so we don't need to track the transactions in the same log, which can improve the latency and throughput of the system massively. So zkLogin has been deployed and been live in around a year. And it's one of the widely used zkApps to date, with around 7.6 million transactions done using by this authentication mechanism, and also around 2.4 million unique proofs. I will explain that why there is a difference between the number of the transactions that was deployed and also the number of the unique proofs that was generated in zkLogin later and in the next slides. So the problem that zkLogin is trying to solve is pretty fundamental, and all of us know about this problem, that the number of active Web3 users and crypto wallets is not comparable with the number of the active Web2 users at the moment. So we have maybe around 100 million active crypto wallets. However, we have billions of active Web2 accounts. So the problem statement that we are looking to solve and address in this work is how we can leverage the Web2 users and bring them to the Web3 applications and Web3 space, and leverage these users for a mass adoption. So I think most of the people in this talk already tried to onboard or already been onboarded to Web3 space. But if someone wants to do right now and today, using, for example, MetaMask, which is one of the popular wallets that the users and the people usually use, is first of all, the user should install an extension or an app, and they are forced to remember 12 to 16 mnemonics as a recovery phrases. So they can enter to the wallet once they are entering the correct mnemonics that was already shown to them during the onboarding process. And once all this process has been done correctly, they will enter and they can interact and sign the transaction and do the interaction that they would like to do in the Web3 space. But we know that crossing this bridge is not easy for every user, especially the ordinary users, that they are more familiar with Web2 applications rather than Web3 applications. So we know that the mnemonics and these recovery phrases is not also a good fundamental for having a mass adoption in this ecosystem as well. So zkLogin is going to also leverage and take the ideas that we already also used in the Web2 space as well. Like we know that each of us maybe has more than 100 accounts, but we don't have a unique password for each of these web apps and websites, of course. We have a couple of popular and famous authentication websites and accounts on their websites like Twitch, Google, Facebook, and Microsoft. And we can leverage those credentials for entering to other web apps and websites. So the solution whenever we are using an existing account for entering to another website is using a technique which is called open authentication. In short, we call it as OAuth. So zkLogin is going to use OAuth that is pretty common in the Web2 space and combine it with zero knowledge proof to achieve these three main goals. One is to be non-custodial. The other one is to be user-friendly, which means that in terms of creating and making the transactions and being finalized on the target blockchain is going to be the same as traditional format of entering to the space via recovery phrases and mnemonics. And the third party and the third property that we are looking for is to be privacy preserving, which means that there shouldn't be any link between the Web2 identity of the users and their Web3 identity. So this is also critical because we don't want to link their Google accounts, for example, with their transaction in a public ledger, which is on the blockchain. So let us start with OpenID Connect, which is an extension to OAuth 2.0, which includes four main entities. I'm pretty sure that you have already been used this technique and technology probably within the last week. And this is the flow that usually happens, that the user opens the web browser and would like to have access to some web app. And web app can be any website that you can have in mind, like LinkedIn or any other websites that the people usually use. So once the user requests such an authentication via OpenID Connect provider like Google, Twitch, and Microsoft, the web app is going to redirect the user to that OpenID Connect provider. And then the user needs to enter its credential in the OpenID Connect provider side. And once the credentials are being verified by this provider, then the user is going to get a token, which is an ID token for this purpose. So this ID token is specifically for OpenID Connect protocol, and it's not covered by OAuth 2.0, but luckily most of these OAuth providers also support OpenID Connect, which is a good news for us, because we need this ID token to combine it with an ephemeral public key for the purpose of Web3 applications and send in the transactions that I will explain in the next slides. So once the user gets this ID token, the web browser is again redirect this ID token to the web app. And once this is valid, checked by the web app and it is a valid ID token, the user will be granted to the resource that it was requesting in the beginning. So this is pretty simple. So the user, instead of entering a unique username and also a unique password for entering and getting access to some resources in the target web app, it uses another party, which is called OpenID Connect provider, to be authenticated. And now the web app can make sure that the user can again come and log into the system using the same technique. So I already told you that the user is getting in one of those flows an ID token, and this ID token is in the format of JSON Web Token. JSON Web Token includes a couple of information and a bunch of data, including a header, payload. Additionally, it comes along with a signature that binds all of this information for the integrity purposes. So the most widely used signature for this JSON Web Token is RSA using SHA-256, but there are also other options in the standard, like using ECDSA and so on, but 99% of the providers are using RSA signatures. So header includes some information about the token type and algorithm that I told you. For example, this is RS-256, which refers to RSA signature using SHA-256. And in the payload, which is one of the most important parts of zkLogin that we want to describe in the coming slides, is it includes a couple of claims, including the client ID, issuer ID, a nonce, user ID, and optional email address. So now a natural question here is, can we use this JSON Web Token? Because we know that only the user who is trying and attempting to log into Google account or any OpenID Connect provider is eligible for having the knowledge of this JSON Web Token. Can we replace this JSON Web Token with a private key, which means that can we somehow treat it as a secret key for the transactions on chain? This is the question that I want to answer in the coming slides. So let's take a look to the proper and real-world JSON Web Token that is issued by Google, and it's also decoded, because the original format of JSON Web Token is encoded based on base 64, and this is a decoded version of that. As you can see in the header part, there is an algorithm, specifically RS-256, and also the type of the token, which is a JSON Web Token. So more importantly, the fields in the payload includes ISS, which is an identifier for the issuer identity. And AUD is specifically for the client or the web app that I already shared in the previous slides. For example, if we have a client like LinkedIn, they have a separate AUD compared to other websites that you can use these techniques. So the client, which is the web app, is going to be registered for the OpenID Connect to enable this feature whenever they want to have a better user experience for onboarding their users. This is also more or less the same approach in zkLogin. And there's another field here in the payload, which is SOP. It's a unique identifier for the user itself. You might actually be surprised, but in Google, for any provider that you are using, for any client that you are using, this identifier and this SOP field is the same. It means that, for example, Google can track you if you are the client of different clients, and this is something that might not be appealing for the privacy aspects. So all of these inputs are static, and the user doesn't have any influence to change them, except the nonce, which is a part that the user can change whatever they want, and they can put it during the authentication process, any input that they want. So initially and basically, the idea regarding the nonce was to protect the system against the replay attacks. But this is the part that we want to use in zkLogin for entering and adding an ephemeral public key. So the user in the wallet is going to choose the OpenID Connect mechanism for authentication, and the wallet is going to create an ephemeral public key. I just want to highlight that whenever I'm talking about the ephemeral public key, it means that the user can completely forget. It's completely different from a permanent public key that we usually use in the traditional blockchain and authentication mechanisms. For example, if you are logging into your account using your wallet in a browser, you will get a different ephemeral public key whenever you are trying to log in to your account and to your wallet using an app on your mobile phone. So this ephemeral public key definitely is binded to an ephemeral secret key, that the ephemeral secret key is going to be used for transaction authentication, when it is part for the integrity of the transactions. I hope that's it's clear so far, but if you have any questions, please stop me and then I can explain in more details. So by doing this and putting the nonce, because it's completely in the power of the user that can put any data that it wants, we put ephemeral public key and expiration date for the user to bind their JSON token with their ephemeral public key that is going to be used for transaction creation. So the zkLogin trick here is we have the payload information in the JSON token. As I already told you, that we have an identifier for the issuer, we have an identifier for the client, and also we have an identifier for the user. Now we can create the address based on these inputs for identifying the user in the on-chain. Okay, so this is like something that we would like to do, because if we want to create the address of the users based on their ephemeral public key, it means that whenever they are trying to enter to their accounts using different devices, they are going to have different addresses, which is not ideal at all. So the idea is to completely define the address in a way that is not dependent to a ephemeral public key, and it depends on static information. But the problem here is, if you want to use the static information, including like issuer identifier and also the client identifier along with the user identifier, anybody can link the Web2 identity of the users with their Web3 identity, which is against the privacy of the users, of course. So this is the place that the SALT come to the rescue. SALT is a persistent per user secret for unlinkability purposes only. So the address, the on-chain address right now is going to be generated and going to be defined in a way that it includes a randomizer to make sure that the output of the address is independent from their Web2 identifier. So I also told you that we need to make sure that all of this information are going to remain hidden as well. It means that the user, whenever want to make a transaction, they need to sign the transaction details for the integrity purposes. And additionally, they need to prove to the validators and the verifier that they have access to a valid JSON token that was generated by the identity provider, which is Google, for example. So what I'm trying to say is that whenever the users are going to make a transaction using zkLogin, it's completely different from the traditional format that we use a secret key to sign the transaction details. We use the ephemeral secret key to sign the transaction details, and along with, we need to also include a zk proof that proves the user has access to a valid JSON token that the ephemeral public key is binded to it. So to make it more clear, the relation that we are proving here is the verifier, which is the validator on the blockchain, has access to the IDP public key and the zkLogin address. That both of them can be public and everybody has access to them. And we need to keep the JSON token hidden because otherwise everybody can impersonate the user. It's something very similar and relevant to the secret key of the user that we have to keep them hidden for the security and privacy purposes. And now we want to make sure that this JSON token is valid under the public key of the issuer, and the address is consistent as well. So as I told you before, the format of the address is zkLogin has this structure that we use the Blake2 signature hash function, and we add the issuer identity, and also including that address, we use a Poseidon, which is a zk-friendly hash function, and include the AUD, which is regarding and relates to the client identifier, and salt, which relates to the user identifier. And we include the salt for the unlinkability purposes between the Web2 and Web3 applications. So by running and creating such a proof, the verifier can make sure that the user has access to a valid JSON token and the credential has been granted correctly to the user. If you have any questions in this slide, please.
Does that mean the user has to store their salt to be able to log into the same address again?
Exactly. So salt managing process is something that the user should do properly. So I'm going to explain it in the next slides, maybe the slide, 2 slides later on. But this is something that the user should do, or they can also get some help from some salt manager for some certain scenarios.
I also have a small question. So the recovery process, if the user gets loses their data, is there a specific slide about that, or can I ask a question about it now?
I will explain in the next slides too regarding that recovery aspects, but I can also give you a short answer here. That you mean that once the user is not getting access anymore to the OpenID provider, how we can rescue from the
my question was more regarding what if the OpenID provider is not collaborative? What is the security model about them? So it seems to me that if the user loses their GWT, but they still have the salt, they will have to regenerate the secret key, the ephemeral secret key, and regenerate the JWT. So if Google is not cooperative,
exactly,
then it's not possible, right? So basically, it's kind of we assume that the adversary is active, but we don't trust them for privacy, right?
Exactly. This is completely right, because we need ID provider, which is Google, for creating this JSON Web Token. Otherwise, only Google has access to the secret key for signing the JSON Web Token payload and extra details. So once the ID provider is not responsible for creating the account, definitely there is a problem here. But this is the main reason that for this type of systems, we rely on some well-known and well-reputed ID providers that we can make sure that they are not going to actually completely stop running these platforms. Otherwise, a lot of systems like zkLogin are going to be also affected as well.
Yeah, sounds good. Thank you.
Yeah. So there's another thing that I can highlight here, that all of these ID providers are also providing a lot of sophisticated recovery aspects that to make sure that the users are not going to lose their access to their account. This is something that for using and deploying such a systems is super important. But this is extremely valuable comment. There are also some way to reduce this risk whenever the ID provider is not responsible. For example, you can go for multi-sig approach that I'm going to cover in the coming slides. That instead of being relied on one single ID provider, you can now go one out of two. That now, if Microsoft and Google, one of them is enough for creating the credential and access for the user. This is something that is also available in zkLogin on Sui blockchain. Amazing. So this is end-to-end zkLogin in one single slide that you can track. As I told you before, the user wants to be authenticated and get a credential from the OpenID Connect provider in the first step by entering their credential. Once they enter the correct credential, they will receive a JSON Web Token. And now we can inject and insert a fresh key, which we call it as a ephemeral public key, to that JSON Web Token. And they need to also fetch and get a salt for their address to make sure that there is no link between their Web2 identity and their Web3 identity. And now we are ready to generate the ZK proof. As I told you before, the relation that we are running for the ZK proof is the user has access to a valid JSON Web Token, and additionally, their ephemeral public key is binded correctly to the JSON Web Token and in the nonce input. And once this is done, now we have a ZK proof along with the signature, that the signature is generated using the ephemeral secret key that is also verifiable under the ephemeral public key, and the ZK proof is also going to be verified by the validators. And if you reach to the supermajority of the validators, then the state is going to be updated. Sounds good. Yeah, regarding the first question that you asked, that how we can make sure that the salt is going to be maintained properly. This is like, again, reaching to the same problem, because the problem statement that we start to solve was the users that we are targeting cannot remember the recovery phrases and mnemonics. And now we reach to the point that to force them to remember a salt, which is like something that might be a little bit shady. So to answer this question, first of all, salt is completely optional. The reason is that it's only for the on-chain privacy. I know that many people respect about the privacy, and it is something that also enabled on zkLogin. But you can think of like the salt can also be avoided in the process of address generation. And in this scenario, you can identify and send the transactions using their email address too. What I'm trying to say is that now the address is completely deterministic by identifying the issuer ID and also the client ID, and along with the user ID. And now everybody can identify the users. For example, someone can send some amount of SUI to anyone who is in the mailing list of O1 Labs crypto reading groups. It's something that's possible, but whenever we are bringing the salt, it means that we are bringing the unlinkability property to the game as well. And it is super important to make sure that the user all the time can retrieve the appropriate salt for the integrating the future transactions as well. So one way is to just put the salt in the user side. For example, I don't know, in their mobile phone or some places that to make sure that they are not going to lose them. And additionally, they can also interact with other devices that they want to join. So for that purpose, SUI also enable a salt service, and salt provider and manager can be seen as an enclave that's just putting the data, and based on some authentication mechanism, the users can retrieve the same salt whenever they want to enter to their accounts again for the future. I hope that it answers your question, but I can also highlight some important aspect later on in the coming slides too.
That makes sense. That answers my question.
Awesome. Okay.
Sorry, Mahdi. Can I?
Yeah.
Can
Sure.
I also something? So I'm not sure I quite followed on the first approximation, first approach without using the salt. So you said that without using the salt, it is possible to generate transactions which are targeting like groups of people, and as far as I understood, like predicates on their IDs. So how exactly does it work?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So imagine that I want to. There's another tool called zkSend, again deployed on SUI, not as popular as zkLogin. But you can actually send the transaction using the email address of the users who have already a valid zkLogin address. What I'm trying to say is that they already initiated and created a zkLogin address, and everybody can deterministically identify the address of those users that created without using a salt. Okay, so this is pretty straightforward because the ISS and AUD and also the user identifier is going to be static, and everybody can determine that what is the address. So this is the pros that everybody can send money without having, initial interaction with the user that they want to send some money. But the cons here is everybody can track their on-chain activities, which is against the privacy of the users.
I see. Okay. One small question. I'm not sure what is the order of uploading this data on the chain. So I understand that if the chain knows a link between the user public key and the user's email, then you can use one or another interchangeably. But when exactly does the chain learn the connection between the email and the public key? So do we kind of register this, or the first time we send authentication? Like, yeah, what's the transaction looking like?
Yeah, so the flow you can think of like anybody actually I can also create anybody can create a zkLogin format address for anyone that they want. Okay, so but the idea is, as long as the user is not getting access to the correct and proper JSON Web Token, they cannot redeem the money from the account. So because the zkLogin address right now is, again, let me back to the format of the address. Yeah, in this format, imagine that the salt is not included to the address. And now we have IDP, the IDC, and user ID. And those informations can be deterministically identified, because in the case of not including the salt, the user ID can also be replaced from SOP to the email address of the user as well. Because the IDC is consistent for example, for Sui wallet, and IDP is for the Google. But you are sending some amount of money to an account that was generated by the sender, but there is no one to redeem it as long as they are not getting access to the actual information in the JSON Web Token.
I see. And the user ID, just remind me quickly, that is this tuple of several elements, or?
Yeah, exactly. So this is a tuple of several elements that you can think of, like, as I told you before, this is a real-world information that is generated by Google, that you can think of like this information is publicly known to most of the people.
Yeah. Okay.
And you can also replace it with email. There is no difference between these two, because this is an identifier that we want to make sure in the terms of identity provider is unique, and someone else is not going to impersonate this user in the Web3 applications.
Okay, and the nonce is not part of that, or is it also a part of it?
No, nonce is not part of that. And nonce in this application and this use case is just going to be a thermal public key and expiration date. And the main reason is we want to make sure that the user who is claiming has access to the JSON Web Token and then signing some transaction details, these two relations are binded to each other. Again, back to the relation, you can think of like the JSON Web Token is valid, and we have also a signature that is verifiable and is also valid under a thermal public key that includes and is already been included in the JSON Web Token and in the nonce field.
This makes sense. Yeah. Okay. I see. It's like a two-step process, and the second part doesn't depend on me. Cool.
Exactly. So we need to bind all of these parts to make sure that someone else is not going to steal the money from another account. Okay, sounds good. So some information regarding the implementation part. We used a CircumDSL for zkLogin full implementation. We ended up with around 1 million R1CS constraint, and also most of it was for SHA-256. Unfortunately, it's not ZK friendly. And the bad news is we cannot change this type of signature schemes because those are being a standard, and unfortunately, a few of providers are supporting the CDSA and other elliptic curve signature schemes. And so we use Graph 16, which, because of the rich ecosystem and also having a fast prover, but there is still a huge interest in the Sui ecosystem to change this proving system to something more advanced and something like that is being deployed recently. So something regarding the benchmarking, as I told you before, we need to fetch the salt, and in zkLogin it takes around 0.2 seconds to fetch the salt from the salt manager, and it also takes around 3 seconds, less than 3 seconds, to generate the zk proofs. As I told you before, once you bind the ephemeral public key to the JSON Web Token and generate a zk proof, we don't need to redo the proof generation for different transactions, because once you generate the first proof, you can store it in your cache of your browser, and you can reuse it for multiple transactions. This is only for the first session of the transactions, and once you create the proof once, you can store it and use it among other and future transactions as well. So the latency, as you can see, is more or less the same whenever you don't want to generate the zk proofs again. Another thing that unfortunately local proof generation was still expensive. 1 million constraint for the ordinary users, especially on the browser, was not that much practical. And this is the main reason that SUI is using some proving systems, which you can see the specs over there in the left-hand side of the slides. And another aspect that I would like to also highlight here is thanks to object-centric approach of SUI, the transaction fee in the zkLogin oriented transaction is the same as the traditional format. However, the validators are doing more computation compared to the only checking the signature validity. So let's back to the trade-off. As I told you before, that since the users are computational restricted, we need to rely on the proving services to generate the proof. And because some of the machines that we already tried are being crashed and they are not easily achievable to generate the proof locally. So whenever we are doing this, we need to share the salt with the proving services. Which is again one aspect against the privacy preserving aspect of the zkLogin, which means that we are just assuming that the proving service is not going to collude with the ID provider. Otherwise, both of them can again track all the on-chain activities of the users. So whenever we transfer this to the local proof generation, this might be a little bit hard for some certain machines, but maybe sometimes it's possible for sufficiently sophisticated machine configuration. So regarding the app managed salt, as I told you before, we can expect that the salt is going to be managed by someone else, not by the user. But the problem is maybe the salt provider can also collude with some other entities that might be against the privacy. So regarding the non-custodial, again, the Google and any identity provider in this flow can also do some bad and malicious activities for impersonating the users, unfortunately. And this is the main purpose that SUI enabled some multi-sig options to have multiple IDPs for generating the JSON tokens and the required credentials for entering to the wallet. So this is a demo that you can follow that. How does it look like once you want to enter the wallet? You can use the existing credentials and enter the transaction. And now whenever you press the send now, it takes around 3 seconds to generate the proof. And now the transaction is going to be finalized if everything goes correctly. So the main reason that whenever it the user press the Google and just directly enter to the wallet is the user already has opened a session with Google and doesn't need to enter the credential again. Is there any questions?
I had a question before, but didn't want to interrupt this flawless video. It's looking very cool. I had a question regarding the previous slide. It's just that you mentioned that it maybe seemed to me, but it seems that you mentioned that the web services, the authentication services have. You made it sound like you assume more of them than I think you do. So can you maybe just repeat what do you trust them for? I think they cannot. So as far as I understand, they cannot impersonate you. They can only leak your privacy. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. So this is like they can link your, your on-chain activities with your Web2 identity, which is like something super important that we have to take into account. Another concern that you can think of, like, imagine that you have never created a zkLogin account, and as I told you before, the choosing of a salt is completely optional for the users, and Google can create an account for any party that they are in the system, which is like whenever they want to initiate. Otherwise, they need to interact with the salt provider to create the zk proof. As long as the account has not been created by the user, the Google can sample a fully random ephemeral public key and secret key, and then essentially can create and obtain a valid credential for entering to the wallet. But the point is, once this is done by the user and the user has created an account, Google needs to interact with the salt provider to be able to generate a valid proof. Otherwise, it's not possible at all.
I see what you mean now. So there is actually like an attack vector, let's say, even though I guess it's very unrealistic assuming auth works at all. It's kind of like assuming that Google will, read your Google Mail and authenticate instead of you in all the apps, which is possible, but like you do assume that that is not happening when you delegate your mail credentials to a mail provider, I guess. So that doesn't sound like an unreasonable assumption.
Yeah, exactly. Because if this is the case, and we assume that this type of attack is going to be done by the ID provider, they can also have access to all of our Web2 apps that we already created and used their existing credential mechanism. It's like they can post Twitter tweets on our Twitter account, and also they can post anything that they want on LinkedIn and so on. But it is not realistic at all, because we know that they are well-known and also well-reputed, and they are not going to do this type of activities. But we can definitely relax the trust assumption that we are assuming here by enabling some multi-sig options, that instead of having one single ID provider who is responsible for creating the JSON Web Token and so on, now we have two JSON Web Tokens that both of them are needed for creating and making a transaction.
I see. Is that actually? I think I understand it perfectly well now. But is that actually the multi-sig approach? Is that implemented in any way in Web2? Because I have a feeling that I've heard about that before. That you can do multi-login or auth.
I'm not aware of any project that do this in the Web2, but this is something that is deployed for zkLogin, and you can also use it on Sui Wallet.
I see. Sounds good.
Yeah. Great. So as I told you before, there is a demo, and also the OpenID providers that are being supported on Sui right now are Google, Facebook, Twitch, Apple, Slack, and Microsoft, and there are also some other ones that they are coming soon. I just wanted to highlight here that we can also use JSON Web Tokens beyond zkLogin. As I told you, that whenever the user initiates such a transaction and interaction with the identity providers, they are getting a token, which is in the format of JSON Web Token. And now you can follow this blog post on Soundness Labs blog post account and websites that that there is a rise for the zk VMs. As I told you, zkLogin is deployed using ROS 16. That is not maybe popular anymore because of the ceremony concern and also some other aspect that we have whenever you want to change the circuit for the future applications. But we try to bring the SP1 zk VM to Sui ecosystem, which is one step ahead for deploying the zkLogin using the zk VMs and instead of relying on the DSLs. So the idea here is we also combine and add an extra application and use case for this type of systems. As I told you in the zkLogin, what we expect and what we care about is we want to make sure that the user has access to a valid JSON Web Token, and also the address is consistent with the inputs inside the JSON Web Token. And additionally, the signature that is going to be verified under a thermal public key is already put it and is sorted in the nonce in the JSON Web Token. So now we can think of like what we did in this showcase and in this example is we take a JSON Web Token similar to zkLogin, but now instead of creating an account for Sui blockchain, we show that the user has access to a certain domain, which is publicly known to everyone, and without revealing the actual email address. You can think of like someone has access to a valid email address for some specific company without revealing the full address details. So a potential expansion that we are also looking for is how we can make some targeted airdrop, for example. Once you have this converter that we already deployed on for SD1 zk VMs, is now you can use the Move smart contracts for targeted airdrops. It means that if the user has access to a domain and also has access to a valid zkLogin address, the user can get some amount of Sui as an airdrop if they successfully show the validity of these proofs. There are a lot of scenarios you can think of, like having a good understanding of this concept using the existing credential, and going beyond that with the rise of the zkVM is pretty simple these days. But unfortunately, the proving time is a bottleneck that we have to make sure that they are more or less similar to what we are targeting right now. Probably below 5 seconds is something more preferable. Otherwise, this is against the user experience. This is my last slide. Thank you so much, and I'm happy to take more questions if there is any.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Mahdi. I do have some questions on my side, but I'll let people maybe ask questions first if someone has anything.
Hello. What sort of attacks have you seen in case when you are trying to fetch some credentials from OpenID Connect or some Google or some third-party provider?
Can you repeat the first part of the question?
What sort of attacks you have seen?
That's a good question. I'm not actually familiar with any type of attacks that was already done against this type of systems, but I need to double check with the team because I'm not following the actual deployment right now. But there was some concern regarding the timing attacks. Imagine that you are getting some credential from Google, and once you are receiving that credential, you are going to request from the proving server to create a proof for you. And there might be some meaningful information between the timing of getting the credential and requesting a proof from the proving service. This was some concern, but I don't think so that is like a huge concern at the moment for the real deployment.
Can we get some invalid credential from Google by some sort of DNS poisoning or something like that? Then the response we're getting is sort of for the mail that I am requesting for, but actually that is coming from a different server that I'm generating locally. In this case, do we are actually proving that I'm getting a valid response from Google from my mail, and if we use that for logging into SUI, does it has the capability to check that this is the wrong response, something like that?
As far as I know, it never happened against the SUI, but there might be some concern regarding the general aspect of the OpenID Connect and all this type of authentication mechanisms. But as far as I know, there wasn't any concern regarding this type of attacks against the zkLogin on SUI blockchain.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no worries.
Okay, well, people are thinking. One question that I had is, how is the public infrastructure of the OpenID providers itself managed?
Mm-hmm.
So it seems to be another attack vector, and I think it's a different problem of its own kind. But how do you even, like, who decides what is the public key of Google on the blockchain?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So key rotation is something that is happening more frequently in this space. For example, Google might change its key every month for the security purposes, and now the credential are going to be validated under that new public key. Okay, so there is an expiration time for the credentials that's already put it in the JSON Web Token specs. But once this public key is being claimed by this ID provider, how we can actually make sure that the validators on the SUI blockchain can have access to the right public key. So because anybody can claim that this public key is valid and coming from the Google, for example. So for this purpose, we need to rely on some oracles. So thanks to, again, something like a few number of validators that are in the zkLogin. There is a move smart contract which is responsible for checking and getting this oracle possible. What I'm trying to say is that the validators on SUI now act as an oracle to make sure that the valid public key is going to be fetched and is accessible on chain for the upcoming transactions.
Okay, this makes sense. Another very similar question is, I don't remember the name of the paper, but you definitely know about this one. It's just the protocol that allows to authenticate, to prove that user authenticated using TLS to a smart contract. So it's a protocol that was changing the nonce of the TLS to prove the TLS authentication was happening. So I think it was called like a DECO. I'm not sure.
Exactly. Yeah.
I just didn't manage to Google it right away. Maybe there was a different name, official one in print. But my question would be, do you see how these two can interact? And like, they seem to be quite complementary to each other, because basically DECO is relying on the public key infrastructure of like the DNS public key infrastructure, basically. So you can say whoever controls google.com / some URL, specific URL, and then the key for open authentication is the right one. So then you can kind of offload these worries to the DNS, basically. Now just rely on the DNS. But you can also do it the other way around, because if people don't want to rely on DNS, they could rely on the on-chain DNS instead.
Exactly. Yeah, this is a very good point. So zkTLS can come to the rescue here as well. It's like how we can make sure that the claimed public key is legitimate and also a valid public key coming from the actual ID provider. But I think the main reason that the team didn't use those techniques was for simplicity purposes, because this approach is just, I think right now SUI has only 110 validators in total, and it's pretty easy to get the consensus amongst all of them on the actual public key that is coming from the ID provider. That once the public key is being rotated by the ID provider, these validators are responsible to confirm the most recent public key and the legitimate one.
Okay, I see what you mean. Yeah, it does sound like you revised a much more simple solution. Have you also considered, I guess like my question was also a bit more speculative and open-ended. I think I see all these identity-related protocols as like big steps towards higher interoperability, generally speaking. And I think zkTLS is just another tool in the chain, in the bag of these tools. And so also, have you considered how this could interact with the DAD standards?
No, as far as I remember, I mean, I know that the team is not interested on that regard, but maybe I'm wrong. But if I understand correctly, the DID is like a decentralized identity provider, but this is like a tailor-made authentication process for some certain blockchain beyond being completely generic for different use cases. And this is the main reason that what we were focusing on in zkLogin was mostly on user experience, how we can improve the user experience for this specific purpose, that how they can make the transactions while using the existing credentials. But this can definitely be one approach for the future research to see that how we can leverage and bring these other existing identity provider or something like identity protocols and combine them with zkLogin and other aspects.
Okay, yeah, this does make sense actually. Yeah. I think your solution tries to solve a particular problem, and I was imagining that the protocol itself can be kind of served as a type of decentralized identity. So instead of trying to authenticate directly to Google, you authenticate through this protocol to Google. That's I think my understanding of how DID works. You specify an identifier. You'll specify this whatever they call, like a cluster of methods, right? And you say, I want to authenticate to that with this particular method. And to me, it seems that zkLogin is just a different method of authentication, which kind of delegated, like a Web3 delegated OAuth. I see.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly.
Okay. maybe another engineering question, if people can catch up, continue on, is why are you using Graph 16? I guess that's a question. That's an easy to answer. Using that for simplicity, right? But why do you have 1 million constraints? What's taking so much space there?
Yeah, so one reason for sticking to Graph 16 was it is deployed. We have a pretty fast verifier and efficient verification on SUI blockchain for Graph 16 as well, because this is super important. The validators can also check the validity of these proofs on chain. The verifier in this scenario are the validators on the blockchain. So, and another reason for picking Graph 16 was the proving time is pretty faster than the other alternatives. For example, as I told you before, we even tried to use some existing zk VMs, and instead of sticking to something like circuit-specific designs like Graph 16, but unfortunately, the proving time there is a huge gap between them. So this is definitely affect the user experience that we are not interested on. And another reason is Graph 16 supports a rich ecosystem, that there was a lot of already improvement on this type of systems that we could leverage, and it was much easier for doing that. But the cons again here is Graph 16 relies on the trusted ceremony and something like a ceremony or a trusted setup. We didn't do a trusted setup, of course, and we had to run a ceremony. I think it happened in September 23 with 120 participants for that ceremony. But you know that if the circuit is going to be changed in the future, it's not the plan right now, but if this is going to be changed in the future, the ceremony should be redo. That is again another hurdle and also hassle for using this type of proof systems.
I see. Actually, sorry, I realized your slide answers my question. I just missed this part of the slide. So the biggest cost, I guess, you're paying is Boolean arithmetics and simulating RSA ring, right? So that's
exactly
what's the TPS 18 trick. So I would expect RSA to take significantly more space than SHA.
Yeah, that's a good question. I need to double check that. What are those tricks? I don't remember exactly, but one reason that was, another alternative for instead of using this technique was actually verify the RSA signatures outside the circuit and only link hash of the message that exists. But again, there was another concern that maybe we are linking the Web2 identity of the users in the Web3 amongst the group of validators. So in this case, we could actually reveal the hash of the message, which includes all of the payloads, information, and so on to the validators, which is again something against the privacy that we were looking for.
Sounds good. Thanks. Does anyone else have any questions? We're 2 minutes over time, which is not a big problem, but.
What other proving schemes have you used other than Graph 16 for this that didn't work due to various other factors?
So as far as I remember, it was only for Graph 16 that we tried. We didn't even try for other proving systems. The main reason was, as I said before, that Graph 16 verifiers was already deployed on SUI, and the validators could run the verification for those type of proofs. But I think that the core team, I'm not part of the Soundness Labs team. Definitely, they are actively working on proving other proving systems to find as an alternative for Graph 16. But as far as I know that the proving time still is not as much as Graph 16 to be attractive for proper replacement for the upcoming months. But this is the main barrier and the bottleneck that they are facing right now. Once the proving time, even by outsourcing the proof to some server, is more or less the same as Graph 16, I think this is something to be done soon.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, if there are no more questions, then again, thank you a lot, Mahdi, for coming and for giving the presentation. And as usual, meet every 2 weeks and yeah, keep updated for the new notifications and new sessions. And thanks, everyone.